Hello and welcome to Kumza Africa Amplified podcast, reverberating across Africa and beyond. Thank you so much for joining us. It is a pleasure to have you along with us. In this special episode, I'm joined by a special guest, a distinguished voice in African literature, Dr. Tsitsi Dangarembga. She is my special guest exclusively here on this platform as we talk about her remarkable journey and her powerful impact in the literary world. I hope you enjoy the conversation. If you like the content of this podcast, remember to subscribe, like, and share. Welcome. All right, Dr. Tsitsi Dangarembga, welcome to Kumza Africa Amplified.
Thank you so much, Kumbelo. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for making the time to be with us on this platform. I'm looking forward to this conversation. After such a long time of hunting you, here we are, Dr. Dangarembga. The stars have finally aligned, isn't it?
Yes, the stars have definitely aligned, and I am just so grateful to all the forces and people who enabled that alignment.
Let's talk about your recent milestone, because we are holding this conversation. We are having this conversation on the back of a milestone that happened recently. You have just been conferred with an honorary doctorate by Rhodes University. How does that make you feel, Dr. Dangarembga?
Yes, Brother Kumbelo, I have just been conferred an honorary doctorate by Rhodes University. It's a D.Lit, Doctor of Literature, and it is very astonishing for me that there have been people who are in positions of influence who have been quietly seeing my work over the decades and appreciating it and thinking that this work is something worthwhile. I know that increasingly on the continent today, people are becoming aware of the importance of the creative industries. However, in Zimbabwe, this is not really appreciated yet, and also in some other African countries. And so I think this is a wonderful signal to the continent that our creative industries are really important in reclaiming and rebuilding. Excuse me.
Sure.
In reclaiming and rebuilding our identities from the kinds of past that we have had, because this is the kind of literature and also cinema and also intellectual work that I have been doing.
Are we really reclaiming those identities that you are talking about?
Well, I think that we are making baby steps at the moment.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work that has to be done, because we need to remember that the challenge to our identities and the actual intentional disruption and destruction of them is something that has a long history, going back to the engagement of Africa with European expansionism. And this happened about 500 years ago. So we are talking about another part of the world that came to Africa with the specific intention of expropriating, and in order to do that, realizing that they had to dehumanize the human beings that they found. So it is a huge task. And so I know that we, in our context today, when we see what other continents are doing, we may get impatient and think we are not really doing this work. But I believe that we are doing it. I do believe that we have to continue to put out the message to say we have to take it more seriously and invest more resources in it than we have been doing. Because there is no way that we will be able to stake our place in the global community if we do not know who we are. If we are constantly trying to be like so-and-so, and we are trying to be like so-and-so, there is no way we can stand up and say, this is who we are, this is what we do, and know that what we do is equal to what other people do also.
What do you think about the notion of Ubuntu and how we can actually reclaim the Ubuntu within our cultures, because it is part of who we are, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think that the gift that we gave ourselves through the spiritual dimensions that come from our Creator, this gift of Ubuntu, or Uno as I call it in Xitsona, it is a very powerful gift. It is the gift that enabled our Bantu cultures to survive over millennia. And it is also a gift that has enabled us to see off this expansionism from Europe. So it is, I think, the most all-powerful thing that we have. I have been thinking about this for a while now, and I have been thinking, is it possible to use a worldview, a means of knowing the world and acting in the world, that was useful for us 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago? Can we use that today? Because the whole economic and social structure in which we are operating is completely different. So my thinking earlier was that the ways of Ubuntu cannot be transferred into today. And it is like in the last 3 or 4 years that I have come to see that my thinking was not accurate. What I see that we are called upon to do is to look back. It is like an ancestral blessing. And to say, okay, we have this ancestral blessing. How can we move it forward so that it is useful for today in the context that we have today? And so this is a concept that I am calling Ubuntu 2.0, because obviously it cannot be exactly the old kind of Ubuntu that was practiced in pre-colonial societies. But there is substance there that we need to reclaim and use in a way that is helpful for us today.
Talk to me about how you see the story of Tambudzai in the present context of Zimbabwe and the present context of the African continent as well.
Yes, I did complete a trilogy of books about a character called Tambudzai. She starts off as a young girl and she progresses through to midlife in this trilogy. And so basically her life takes place in different phases of Zimbabwe as a nation. It begins pre-independence, that's mainly the first book. It goes on during the war period, which is the second book, and then it comes to completion in the third book, which is post-war. And so, of course, when telling the story of a person, one is going to look at the issues and the troubles that that person faces. It is not possible for any person in this world to go through a trouble-free life. And so I always like to connect the personal troubles that my characters experience to the bigger social and political and economic issues in the settings that they are in. So by using this character, Tambudzai Sigauke, through 4 or 5 decades of her life, I was able to explore the social conditions of human beings in Zimbabwe over a similar period.
We are talking about the story of Tambudzai, but a lot has changed, isn't it? Since independence, we are now seeing the evolving socio-economic conditions compared to the time when you started putting together the first novel, Never's Conditions, way back in the 80s. Talk to me about these shifts. You know, how have they impacted your writing? Because we are no longer in the olden days. We are living in the 21st century.
Yes, well, my writing process is beyond technology. The impulse for it. By the time I come to use technology, whether it's writing longhand with a pen, or whether back in the day typing on an upright typewriter, or now my computer, or a mixture of these, a lot of the writing has already happened. I'm just putting down on paper what has happened pre-technology. So that remains the same. And it's important for me to let it remain the same. Because if I think, oh, there's technology, let technology take over more of my thinking processes and what I bring as a human being, I feel that I will not be being an adequate witness to my times, which is what I want to do with my writing. So then, of course, we come to the whole industry of the creative industries and literature. And that, of course, has been impacted by technology. One thing that technology has done is that it has allowed us to share our stories so much more. And so now people are able to read the same story and appreciate it much more quickly. This, I think, is leading to a normalization of certain kinds of narratives. And so it is very difficult to get those very unique narratives out there. More and more, we are being forced to conform to a certain kind of narrative. It is a bit like the pressures on film. Because film is dominated by the Hollywood studios, they are now determining how stories should be written and what the fundamental ingredients and structure of a story should be. So now with technology, these kinds of normalizing pressures are coming to bear on literature as well. I think that this is something that's quite dangerous for us. Because we do have this hegemony of the North in these creative industries. And so it means that we will be forced more and more to conform our ways of writing to those Northern ways of writing. What is the antidote to this? Again, the antidote to this is for us to engage on our creative economy. You spoke about that maybe having synergistic approaches to Ubuntu. We need to do that with the creative economy also. Of course, we need our local creative economies, but then we have to think regionally. In the different regions of Africa, we have people whose cultures are even more similar. So Southern Africa could do more in terms of having a Southern African creative economy. Similarly, with East Africa and West Africa, they're already quite far ahead in that. And then, of course, we can then expand to continental industry. And I think we could do it with the right political will, but unfortunately, a lot of our politicians, especially for those who came out of liberation struggles, their thinking and their ideology is informed by their history of struggle. And so it is very difficult for some of them to really understand the needs of a society that should be evolving into post-struggle.
What do you see, Dr. Dangarembga, as the role of artificial intelligence in African literature?
Well, I think that any tool is only as good as the people who are using it. I hear that there is a big problem at the moment with young people at universities who are using AI to write their assignments. And this is fine. These assignments might be written and people can pass, but it means you have not done the thinking yourself. So it means when you are confronted with a problem where you have to think on your feet, you won't be able to do it because you have not practiced and fostered those ways of behaving cognitively, and you will be reliant on AI. So now let us find out who is controlling AI, who is setting up all the algorithms. It is not us. So again, it is the same thing. If we want AI to be useful for us, we have to develop our own technologies where we input what we want to get out of it. AI is not natural. It's not just bubbling up from the ground. It is bubbling out of somebody's mind. And we have to ask, whose mind is this AI bubbling out of? Is it a mind that is concerned with serving me as an African?
During your inauguration, during the conferment of your doctorate recently, you mentioned something along the lines of not stopping. And I'm going to quote what you said. You said, "Not stopping is a fundamental part of my story today. I dream about where we might go and what we might achieve. Even as forces of greed and fascism and racism form, if those who have the good progress of all humankind and all creation in mind, together with unity of purpose, we can decide, no, we are not stopping." What a powerful statement.
Yes, I think the whole world is in shock at what is happening in the United States at the moment. It is almost like a Pandora's box was opened. Like the people in the United States, the electorate there were like Pandora herself. And the government was this box, and they opened it and let out, well, what we see happening now. And so for me, it is important to say, what can people who understand that human beings need systems that work for them, not systems that help them to obtain this imaginary thing that is money, that now is really so many electronic transactions. And we are calling that money, and we are calling that wealth. For me, it's important to think about what is wealth truly. How can we define it? And this is where Ubuntu comes back again. Because in my culture, the old greeting was that if somebody says, "How are you?" the answer is, "I am well if you are well also."
Yeah.
And that was a conceptualization of wealth. That we are well if we are all well together. And so now we see people who are saying, "I am well if I can get everything from you." That is the opposite of Ubuntu. It is the absolute complete opposite of Ubuntu. And we know that when colonizers came to our part of the world, they failed completely to colonize us. David Livingstone had to write in his diaries that the reason we cannot colonize people and even convert them to Christianity is that they are happy the way they are. So in order to fulfill our project of Christianity, civilization, and commerce, which he called the 3 C's, we have to break their culture completely. In other words, he is saying they are happy. We have to make them unhappy. We have to bring misery, and only then will we be able to do what we want to do to the people. So this is what he did. And so for us today, when we see what is happening in the United States of America, which is a neo-European state, we should understand that it is still in that same vein of bringing misery. And as human beings, especially us from the African continent, we have to remember that we have this Ubuntu, where no, I am only well if you are only well also. And I think that this can be a rallying point that can help us to find psychological and cognitive and emotional powers within ourselves to push back against these forces of destruction of everybody but an elite group of billionaires in the United States that is now threatening to overwhelm us.
Capitalism is also playing a part in what you are saying there, isn't it, Doctor? But let's talk about the preservation of African literature here on the continent, Doctor. Do you think we are doing enough as a continent?
I believe that as a continent, there are 2 sides to what we are doing. For me, the preservation is also partly creation of literature, because literature is not static. If we just have a few old books that we say we want to preserve, then they can quickly fade from mind. We also need the great writing that is coming out now so that people understand that it is a living thing that has a long trajectory. So I know that there are many young people on the continent who have literally committed their lives to creating literature and therefore keeping the notion of African literature alive. And I really cannot commend them enough. And they are working across the continent, from Nigeria to Kenya to South Africa to Namibia. They are working together. They are finding ways of distributing the books. They're doing amazing things. However, nothing can happen on the scale that is needed for a whole nation, a region, or a continent if the authorities are not involved. And this is where I think we are lacking. The authorities are not working to make people understand that literature and the other creative arts are an important area for investment. We have immensely wealthy people on the African continent. You look at where they are investing their money. It is not in the creative industries. Yet we have an industry like Hollywood, which takes over the minds of our young people. We have streaming platforms that take over the minds of our young people. And sometimes you hear these authorities saying, oh, the young people are not behaving in the way that they should as young African people of this continent. Well, how can they? What are you giving them for them to participate in that builds an idea of who they are, and not only who they are, but who they can be on the continent? The government is not doing that. And this is often because the government also has a specific need from the people. It needs votes from the people.
Yeah.
And so any activity that might interfere with the people delivering votes is not going to be something that will receive a lot of attention. And of course, once you allow people to tell their many different stories, you are going to empower many different ways of thinking. Whereas for some of our governments, they want one way of thinking, which is that only the government is right and I have no power and I have to do whatever my government tells me, otherwise I'm finished, I'm done for. So we have this kind of tension on the continent. So really, I think the problem lies with us, and I think it's a soluble problem, but I think it will require a change in the ways of thinking in some of our authorities, and I'm not sure whether enough of our authorities are ready. You look at South Africa, you look at Kenya, you look at Botswana, you look at Nigeria, those are countries where they have understood and they haven't fallen apart. So this should be a signal for other countries on the continent that no, you will not fall apart if you empower your creative industries. In fact, you will do better and you will present better and have better global standing if you promote these industries, including literature.
What is driving, what is influencing your narratives at the moment?
There are two things really that have influenced everything that I do in the world of narrative, and also my intellectual engagement. And that is basically, I have this desire to reflect to people, beginning with people in my country, our lives, so that we can see our lives and be able to engage with them without being really overwhelmed by them. You know, there's this saying that a fish does not know it is in water. I don't know whether this is true, because none of us have asked the fish. You know, maybe they will tell us, of course we know we are in water. But we say that a fish does not know that it is swimming in water. And so another way of expressing this is you cannot see the forest for the trees. So literature and other kinds of narrative are a way of giving people distance so that they can see the forest, so that they can understand that they are in the water. Once you can do that, you can start asking yourselves questions. What kind of water is this? Is it clean? Is it water that can grow the plants of the sea so that I get enough food? Once you have that distance, you can start being analytical. So for me, this is a process of engaging with the conditions that I call citizen agency. The power to ask the relevant questions concerned with your well-being. And if the well-being is not proper, to then start organizing with other citizens in a legitimate way to address these issues. So for me, I want to make this reflection for people. Of course, I want to do it in a way that is entertaining, in a way that can also make people feel good, as well as only encourage them to think about issues, because those moments of relaxation are important. Then the other thing that is important for me is to create points around which we can talk.
Yeah.
Remember when we had that film, the one about Wakanda?
Yeah.
When that film came out, people on the continent, in the diaspora, we were all talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
And even we had the same physical signs because of this film. So the more we can talk about ourselves as having an identity and talk to each other about this, the more we can grow together as different groups of people. And so I also want to promote the kind of literature and cinema where people from the continent and across the diaspora can have common reference points in their imagination.
Yeah. Talking about a common reference point, Doctor, you have once lamented the fact that the availability of your books, particularly in Zimbabwe, I'm not sure in other parts of the continent, you have once lamented the fact that your books are difficult to find in Zimbabwe. Why is that the case?
Well, the reason why that is the case is that generally the books that are published in Zimbabwe are educational books. So we have a small market for other kinds of literature. This, of course, has to do with the economic situation. There was a time when Zimbabweans did buy books for pleasure, but very few Zimbabweans have the kind of money that's required for that now. So we have a problem with the market. It simply doesn't exist. But this again is an issue of political will. There are ways to make books less expensive if you want people to read them. If you slap high taxes on books, then they are going to cost more and they will be less accessible. So again, there are issues of political will, but it's also about the industry. Most of my books have done well outside of the continent because I come from a generation of writers before this other generation that is doing good things on the continent. Yeah. So most of them have to be imported or they have to be sub-licensed. Now, my books are sub-licensed to a South African company which is not doing a great job of distributing these books. So it's a whole intricate system. And that's why I say that we need to take control of these systems so that we know that we can publish the books more cheaply. They don't have to be glossy. You know, we can publish on cheaper paper. There are ways of doing this. And this is what this young group of people are doing. So I am hopeful that they will continue to have impact. But there is no creative industry in the world that does not thrive on philanthropy. Philanthropy is part of the system that sustains the creative industries. You know, you go way back, even into our own courts. We had the praise singers who were supported by the nobles of the time.
Yeah.
And if you look at Europe, you have the court musicians who were supported by the royalty. And so it is normal that people who have more in a material sense will support people who do this work of producing this intangible heritage. And we don't have that on the continent. As I said before, we have immensely wealthy people on the continent, but they are not putting their money into literature and the other creative arts. And this is a big problem, and it's something the government should actually start giving tax rebates for people. I'm not sure what the situation is in South Africa. It may be that such systems already exist. From what I hear, though, from my colleagues, it hasn't gone far enough and needs to go further. And in some countries, it doesn't exist at all. So it would also be good if we could find ways of speaking directly to captains of industry and well-to-do people so that we could come up with a plan. In the end, they would find that it benefits them because the population would have more agency and would be able to better determine the things that are good for it, which means that they would end up being able to create situations where they have more money, and then they would be able to buy more products. So if the captains of industry and the well-to-do people could think like that, then I think we could get somewhere.
There is certainly a lot that still needs to be done in terms of getting these captains of industry on board, Doctor. This brings me to the issue of publication, because you also encountered a lot of problems after writing your first novel, Nervous Conditions. It wasn't published immediately, isn't it? You encountered a lot of problems before it got published.
Yes. Very definitely. I wrote Nervous Conditions back in the 80s, which was just after Zimbabwe's independence. And of course, the publishing that had flourished in Zimbabwe before independence was completely controlled by the colonial state, the Rhodesian state. And one of the ways that they controlled the population was to control the literature that the population could read. We had these literature bureaus, and they published the texts that were available to African people. And they were religious, they were fundamental stories about the evils of women coming to town, women who come to town, women of ill repute, etc. And so they used it as a kind of social engineering. And it was the same in cinema. They had the colonial film units, which also produced propaganda. And so I was writing on the cusp of the changeover, and we had a situation where many young people had gone out of the country, and in particular the young men had engaged with literature, people like Chenjerai Hoe, people like Nambutso Marechera, Stanley Nyamfukuza, and so forth. And so some of these people were the people who came back and occupied positions in publishing houses as commissioning editors. They were young men, they were really full of joy with their own accomplishments, and these accomplishments were not feminist accomplishments. So here comes a young woman who says that she is a feminist and is writing Zimbabwean feminist literature. I think it was very difficult for them. Even across the Atlantic Ocean, it was the time where the voices of melanated African-descended women in the United States were just beginning to be heard. And so it was quite a new thing, and I think it was too new for the publishing houses in Zimbabwe. So I had to wait until I could find a publisher in the UK who actually turned out to be a South African woman. It is very interesting how my career is quite intimately related to South Africa, because now I have this wonderful recognition from Rhodes University, who conferred a doctorate, honorary doctorate on me. Again, that's South Africa. And so it was this woman who was in the UK, exiled from South Africa because of her progressive politics, a white woman, and she was able to pick up this book and understand the story that I was saying. I think if it had been another person who did not have that African experience, it might not have got published. And so this is why it's so important to have people who understand the context of our stories to channel the resources to them.
Why do you think that your work, because you have done incredible things over the years, decades upon decades, but why do you think your work has not properly been recognized in your native country of Zimbabwe, Doctor?
Yes, I think that I began my work at a time when Zimbabwe had just become independent.
Yeah.
And in the minds of the state, the important thing was to consolidate the gains of the liberation struggle. And I do not think that our Zimbabwean government has fully been able to depart from that. And I think because the liberation struggle, where some people were out of the country for 20 years and some of them were in very awful conditions in camps in neighboring countries, it was not an easy experience for those people. It obviously is an experience that imprinted itself on them for life. We hear about veterans from the United States who are still suffering psychological trauma because of what was experienced. This is normal in war. And then you also need to realize that Zimbabwe itself was a country that suffered tremendously during the liberation struggle, which was fought mainly in the rural areas. So it means that it was mainly the African people who suffered from that. And then after the war, we went into a genocide where the Ndebele people speaking, the Ndebele language speaking people were the victims of a genocide perpetrated by the government, which was largely Xitsonga speaking. So it is a country with a history of great trauma. And under these conditions, everybody is uncertain and they are looking to an authority to say, this is what you must do. And this authority wants to consolidate what it did. And because the people who actually went out to study or to prosecute the war are not a great portion of the population, it means that we have a small group of people thinking this is what we did and this is what we must protect. And so it becomes really difficult for them to defocus from that to think about the good of the whole society, which would include things like a vibrant art sector. So I really am not part of the equation.
You're not part of the equation. Are you hoping that at some point in future you will definitely be part of the equation?
You know, my brother, I've been working for nearly half a century now.
Yeah.
And if I continue to wait for people who have a different focus, I may be wasting my time.
Let's talk about film making as we wind up this conversation. You mentioned that you have also ventured into film making. How important is film making when it comes to storytelling?
Filmmaking is hugely important when it comes to storytelling.
Yeah.
For one thing, it can reach people who are not used to reading or who do not like reading. It doesn't require the mental effort that is required for reading. And then there is something else about film, because it is a visual medium and the eye perceives something in the same way that it perceives reality. The brain initially does not distinguish. I think you may have heard about stories where people are shown a film on a screen for the same time and they run around the back to see if there are people acting behind. That's because the brain has to learn. So the fundamental first response to a film is to reality. So you can imagine the impact on people of this thing that looks like reality. We therefore have to say to ourselves, whose realities are we consuming in these films? Are they our own realities? Are these stories about what we want as people? Or are they stories where other people are telling us, you are like this? So unless we can get our stories about who we are and what we want and where we want to go consumed by us, we will always be governed in our minds by those images that are coming from other people.
Let's wrap up this conversation. We're talking about what you are working on. What exactly are you working on? Any novels that people can look out for?
Yes, I'm working on a novel, and I'm working on a book that will incorporate some of the things we spoke about Ubuntu. So that's non-fiction, so those are two different projects. And I have several film projects that I'm working on. And there's a lot that I'm hoping I'll be able to bring to the public sooner rather than later.
Dr. Tsitsi Dangarembga, it has been such a pleasure having you exclusively here on Kumza Africa Amplified platform. We thank you. I highly appreciate you. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking to you.
Thank you so much. That was Dr. Tsitsi Dangarembga joining us exclusively here on Kumza Africa Amplified, reverberating across Africa and beyond. I hope you have enjoyed this conversation. If you like the content of this podcast, remember to subscribe, like, and share. Until next time, it is goodbye for now. Cheers.